Black perspectives haven't always been centered in the telling of America's story. Now, we're taking center stage. Introducing NPR's Black Stories, Black Truths, a collection of Black-led stories from NPR's podcasts. Search NPR Black Stories, Black Truths wherever you get your podcasts.
Support comes from Mercedes-Benz of Buckhead, where the power of electric meets the power of Mercedes. Introducing a lineup of electric vehicles, the EQB, the EQS sedan and SUV, the EQE sedan and SUV. The vehicles are all electric. The feeling is all Mercedes. Mercedesofbuckhead.com.
Today on the Political Breakfast Podcast, it's a year in review. We sort through the best and worst political stories of 2023. Some are pretty prominent and thrust Georgia into the national spotlight. But Brian and Tharon may have a few surprises for you here. Thanks for listening to Political Breakfast on WABE.
Welcome, everyone, to this special edition of Political Breakfast. And I say special because today we're going to say a fond farewell to 2023 by recapping, let's say, some of the best and some of the worst of Georgia politics. Republican strategist Brian Robinson and Democratic strategist Tharon Johnson are both here today. So is our producer, Lily Oppenheimer. Hello to all of you.
Happy New Year to all of you.
Good to be here.
We all had the assignment recently to make a list of some of the stories that really took hold of Georgia politics. And we took a week and a half or so. We all came up with lists rather quickly. And I think on all of our lists, we're going to begin with the worst because I want to end on a high note. But the worst, we talked about that Trump mugshot, all of us, and the former president being arrested for election interference here in Georgia. Brian started off.
That was the most iconic image coming out of Georgia in 2023. No doubt about it. And a historic moment where the former president is being booked into the jail. And that's going to be something that we remember here for a long time, just like we remember Richard Nixon getting on, Marine One, leaving the White House after he resigned. My worst list, I would have to begin early in the year. And I had to really think through this because we have this present day bias. We remember what's happened most recently and we kind of forget what happened in the winter. But let us not forget that we started off the year with rioting in downtown Atlanta in the wake of protest of the Public Safety Training Center that turned violent. We had windows broken. We had police cars set on fire. And this immediately impacted Georgia politics because we were already in session. And legislators took up legislation to make burning a police car a felony, that made rioting a felony. And it led to some degree to efforts to crack down on prosecutors. And that's still an ongoing issue that's been in court, been a partisan issue that has divided people. But this get tough on crime attitude in the General Assembly, yes, it was impacted by a general concern about crime amongst the electorate. But those images, those violent images in our community certainly put gas in the tank of this movement to take on some of these violent things. So that's where I would start as worst of the year.
I think, Lisa, you're right. I mean, one of the most memorable moments we will remember, particularly about Fulton County, Georgia, is when after, months and months, almost a year of anticipation on whether or not DA Fonnie Willis would actually indict a former president of the United States. And then if the Fulton County sheriff would follow the process and protocol in which, he treats everyone else to actually fingerprint and mugshot and arraign a former president.
Specifically, the indictment brings felony charges against Donald John Trump, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani.
To me, that was one of the most contentious times in our county. But I think the thing that I remember the most that was sort of just theatrical, but also a circus. Let's not forget at the beginning of the year, to Brian's point, we didn't have a Speaker of the House. If you look at what was going on in Washington, D.C., there was an unprecedented, historic amount of days that went by without leadership. And so, finally the Republicans were able to get their acts together and get enough votes to make Speaker McCarthy the speaker. But then, boom, look at how we at the end of 2023, and he's no longer the speaker, and the guy now is about to retire from Congress. And so those are just kind of a couple, I think, worse highlights for me.
Does Giuliani, he made the list, three lists. How did that fare with both of you and him putting Georgia on the map again, for something regarding the election?
Well, we discussed this a little bit in last week's show that, this is the fall of someone who had been an American icon and in many ways has become a laughingstock. And it's sad to watch that. But I think why this is on the worst of list is because of the lack of repentance that we saw from him. I think he knows, well, we all know that the $140-something million verdict is meaningless because he doesn't have that much money, right? They may bankrupt him, but they're not going to get that kind of cash. He's not a billionaire. In fact, he's probably been in money woes for a long time now. But the fact that he would say he wouldn't do anything differently, that did not sit well with me, and that's why he would be on my worst of list. But one thing I do want to say is I don't want to just focus on these Republican worst ofs because that's not my job here. I think that one of the worst ofs, and I've said this consistently throughout 2023, I have a fundamental principled disagreement with the Fulton County DA. I think she's an honorable person, and I think that she means well. But I don't think it made sense in the context when the federal government was taking up a very similar case against President Trump. I don't agree with the decision to take a local prosecution. It took up 18 months of this Fulton grand jury, and it ended up kind of being a spectacle to some degree. The jury forewoman, of course, went on a media tour that really nobody anticipated. It was a little bit wacky. I think we could all agree.
Like a lot of very compelling evidence, a lot of very interesting things. And things that we didn't expect.
I will admit I found it somewhat endearing and wildly entertaining, and I wanted more of that content. But I had a real problem with the indictment of some of the alternate electors. Those people's lives have been put through the ringer. It's not fair to them. You can disagree with them, but they're not insurrectionists. They were told that this was needed as a placeholder in case the court case went their way. When the court case didn't go their way, they dropped it. So I feel like those folks have been unfairly treated. And I disagree with that prosecution. Let Jack Smith and the DC feds, who have much bigger, deeper pockets, let them take on this very expensive case.
I don't know, Tharon, where does Fulton County DA Fani Willis land with you? Best, worst, or in between in terms of the year of the Fulton County DA?
I think it was, it lands in the category of best for me because this is a woman who's very clear and succinct that she was going to investigate the illegal activities committed by people who she believed committed these crimes. And she was going to take her time and she was going to indict everyone who she thought should be indicted. And, one of the things that we saw from the reports was that there were a long list of people that she was looking at. And she ended it with these 19 individuals, which I think 3 or 4 of them have already pled guilty. It can't be worse, but it can be challenging for her going forward, Lisa, because now she is the poster child of the MAGA movement, of a district attorney that's quote unquote being targeted for indicting the former president. So she's got to make sure going into 2024 that she continues to be aggressive and let the people know what's going on, be transparent. But no, I think, look, she was a winner in all this. I mean, she took her time. She was good. She fought back all the attacks thus far, knock on wood. This has been a pretty smooth process from the DA's point of view. However, that doesn't mean that it can't be derailed or get a little complicated going forward. But ultimately, I think she definitely is in the best category.
I do think that this conversation is very indicative of Georgia. There's a partisan split on how we view what has happened here. And even your non-MAGA Republicans, which probably most Republicans who listen to WABE are in that non-MAGA category, think that some of this prosecution went overboard. Tharon is right, and the media narrative is going to be what Tharon said, that she's flipping people, she's getting guilty pleas. I would note that those guilty pleas went from felonies to misdemeanors, which is a huge deal. Like, for these lawyers, that means they get to continue practicing law. For the bail bondsman, it means he gets to continue being in that legal world profession that he'd be barred from otherwise. I do wonder if it raises the issue that these people were overcharged to begin with as a leverage point. And so I really do kind of wonder, and this is you're getting to more of a fundamental issue, but do some of these people not really commit crimes, but they were indicted so that they could be used as leverage because they had information? I think that's a legitimate point of debate. I don't think that we in Georgia are going to get that deep into the debate. I think it's a point worth making.
Both of you listed the lawsuit making, the state go into a special session and redraw those districts and the ongoing litigation. I think Lucy McBath would agree. Brian, you want to give your thoughts on that?
That's in my worst category. To me, we spent millions of dollars on this case. Yes, the plaintiffs won in theory. It cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars to have a special session. We're still incurring court costs. And I would imagine, I'm not privy to Tharon's conversations with Democratic legislators, but I was at a bipartisan political event 2 weeks ago, and I had a Democratic state House member say to me, I want to wring the neck of the plaintiffs because it created chaos for House Democrats. They had their districts changed under them, which had to happen under this lawsuit. And now the plaintiffs are back in court, and they're making the argument that this doesn't meet the ruling because it didn't, quote, change the balance of power in the General Assembly. Well, courts can't make legislatures draw more Democratic districts. It can make them draw more districts where a certain minority, in our case, Black Georgians, have a chance to elect a Black candidate to office. That's what the law does. It doesn't say, hey, you have to go draw more Democratic districts. And the state is drawing that case in court today, and today meaning ongoing. And the state feels really good about the response of Judge Steve Jones in its hearing held on December the 20th, that he said, yes, when I talked about, minority influence districts, I was talking about majority Black districts, which is what they drew.
Tharon, I imagine this was on your worst list as well, right?
Well, it's worse to the point where we had to endure because the Republicans failed to do their job. The plaintiffs were able to get a lawsuit upheld because they pointed out factual evidence that the maps that were presented and approved by this legislature clearly diluted Black voting power in the state of Georgia. And so that's why the judge came back with a 500-page sort of recommendation and verdict of instructing the Republican-led legislature to go back and draw different districts, particularly, don't dilute Black voting power. And so I think it was the worst because we had to endure that. And then to find out, we come out of the legislative process, and then there's maps that I think on both sides where the Democrats made a strategic play to focus on, quote-unquote Black districts, but also make sure they point out the fact that there were these coalition districts that are being destroyed as well. But but at the same time, Republicans, I believe, came up with a scenario where it was just the bare minimum, knowing that there may be some changes, but whatever the outcome may be, it makes everyone sort of try to look as best as they can to say, well, it's better than what we quote unquote had. So, Steve Jones there was an article I read that talked about, who's Steve Jones and how much power he has to not
he does. He's at the center of everything.
Yeah, to dictate, the future of citizens, but also he's going to make a decision about a lot of people's political and public service careers as well. I mean, you mentioned Lucy McBath. Lisa, I was able to, talk to her last week as well. And she's truly like, look, I'm built for this. They've been targeting me for, a few years now, almost 6 years now. And so she's definitely going to stay strong and persevere. But, Sanford Bishop was in Atlanta recently, raising money for his campaign. And I saw David Scott's daughter, who said that the congressman is definitely going to run again, and he's going to run in whatever district is ready. So, it's just unfair as a worse because the taxpayers, the voters, the elected officials have all this uncertainty because of a failure of the Republican legislature to do their jobs. But at the same time, look, we got to let the courts process play itself out and ultimately be prepared to whatever the verdict may be.
And I do think what Tharon's saying on the facts of the case is largely true when it comes to the coalition districts, and that kind of gets to the heart of the matter, right? The coalition, they won't like X amount of majority black districts, and then one more that's got a heavy but not majority population of black voters, which basically creates a new Democratic district. That is the crux of this debate as a way of explanation. I do think that the original comments about Judge Jones on December 20th suggest he's okay with the maps. We'll see. Well, that'll be one of the big questions of 2024. I'll remind our listeners that Judge Jones has to decide by the end of January because we got to print ballots, begin printing ballots for 2024's primaries.
Hey, y'all, I'm Mark Kendall.
And I'm David Perdue.
And we're the hosts of What's Good Atlanta, the new weekly comedy podcast from WABE.
On What's Good Atlanta, we run down uplifting and unusual headlines from the universe known as Atlanta.
And while we may not be journalists, we are comedians, and we'll be breaking down news and breaking down the stories that make you smile.
We're just trying to see what's good, Atlanta.
Episodes drop Fridays at WABE.org or wherever you get your podcasts. I get mine from a guy named Craig.
Shout out to Craig.
Mm-hmm.
WABE.
Ever wondered where to find the best dumplings in town? Curious about Atlanta's obsession with lemon pepper? Join us on Savory Stories, a new podcast as we uncover the untold tales behind Atlanta's culinary scene. From the roots of your favorite dishes to the creators that bring them to life, we're diving deep into the heart of the city's food culture. Listen to Savory Stories at wabe.org/podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.
WABE.
We've talked about Giuliani, Trump, and Fani Willis, just some of the faces of 2023. Let's talk about some others, though. Just recently, Congressman Drew Ferguson announced his retirement. What is that? That's bittersweet. That was on your list.
That's on my worst list. That's on my worst list. Because, look, it's really hard. We're seeing this more and more, particularly on my side of the aisle. Democrats tend to go to Congress and stay longer, from what I can see. Republicans, particularly those who have been small business owners or executives, kind of get fed up with the lack of progress, the lack of getting things done, the toxicity, which I think probably both sides really hate. We're losing a really good member. Drew Ferguson was smart. He was responsive. He's a nice guy. He's sensible. He took a courageous stand during this latest round of the speaker vote when Jim Jordan was bullying him to vote for him, and he stood up and said no, enough, and helped be part of the solution, getting a consensus candidate amongst the Republicans to become speaker. So he's going to be a big loss. And what concerns me is what comes next, right? We, in recent cycles, have had some polarization in these primaries, and I'm concerned about losing sort of a mainstream voice who's focused on getting things done. And we get that if the 3rd District voters replace a get things done conservative with another get things done conservative. This isn't worst of. Best of luck to Drew Ferguson and whatever he does next. But my concern is we may not get somebody of the quality of him. So that's why it's on my worst list. And I like him. I hate to see him go.
Tharon, you had Misha Maynor, that party switch. What was that, about maybe 6 months ago? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Best, worst, interesting, surprising?
Yeah, I put State Representative Misha Maynard on the list because it was surprising. And it was also sort of a worst moment, not for her personally, let's be clear. I mean, she clearly made a decision. I've actually talked to her since she's made this decision that I totally disagree with. But it was a surprising move and worse for our party because it was sort of a wake-up call for us to know that, look, we got to make sure that when we are vetting these candidates, allowing them to pay their money, they have to pay their money. I think it's $3,000 plus, or depending on what race you're running for, it can go anywhere between $3,000 and $5,000 to qualify as a Democrat and represent a Democratic district. And so it gave the Republicans an opportunity, it only lasted for a couple weeks, to say, hey, we got a new black member of the Republican Party in Georgia. And so, that was historic because, she, in making this move, was a historical move. It's the first time ever happened in Georgia that we've had a person who is a woman switch from a party to go to another party, being, Democrat goes Republican.
No party is perfect. But if I can get things done and it's peaceful on the Republican side, then that's what I'm going to do. I'll be able to do so much more.
But I think it was also a good wake-up call for us, and we needed it going into 2024 because, we'll do better vetting with our caucus members, but also making sure that, we elect people in these districts that are going to represent the folks in their district. And so, she's, again, we've agreed to disagree on her move. We've talked. She knows where I stand. I did not like some of the public sort of people who went after her, but I think some of it was deserving because I've later found out that, there was a lot of stuff behind the scenes that we didn't know. But ultimately, that was a big surprising moment, learning moment for Democrats in 2023.
Yeah, for obvious reasons, this is on my best of list because this is sort of a symbol of something that I've talked about on the show over the last 8 years. And that is we are a rapidly diversifying state. We are a state that probably in the overall population is majority minority now, a white population below 50%. And if Republicans want to keep control of the General Assembly and the constitutional offices and have a chance at taking on incumbents like Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff, they've got to get non-white votes. And Misha Maynor, I don't want to overstate it or overplay it because I don't think it's indicative right now of a mass movement. I'm not crazy. But I do think that when you see the issues that cause her to change, she wants a serious approach to crime that terrorizes her constituents. And she wants the parents in her district to have a choice in education if their kids are stuck in a failing school. I think those are issues that speak beyond any particular race. I think these are issues where Republicans can make real inroads with minority voters because we all share those same concerns. We all want to have great opportunities for our children. We share that principle and that goal. And I think those are two issues, and there are others, particularly as Atlanta is such a great example of the booming of Black-owned businesses, right? So you have Black entrepreneurs who have the same concerns as any other small business owner, and small business owners have traditionally been Republicans. So,
yeah. And I know this is not a back and forth debate, Lisa, but, I've tried to be quick because I know this is a quick end of the year show. But let me be very clear. Those 2 points that Brian just mentioned, those issues, we can mention 6 of them. Misha Maynor could have addressed all those issues as a Democrat, all of them. Democrats care about our children. Democrats care about public safety, particularly where she represents for our listeners. She represents one of the most sort of, tough areas in the city of Atlanta. And so, we're not going to let her off the hook with that. That was a personal decision that she made based on, I think, a lot of different things. It was ambition. I think a part of it, she saw an opportunity to really try to get some things done in the Republican Party because clearly she had burned a lot of bridges within her Democratic caucus. Let's not leave that out. And, I've talked to her. This was something that she didn't let people widely know. So let's not let our listeners know that Republicans were all in line recruiting this woman and they were all welcoming her with open arms. This was an impulsive decision that she made to switch at a moment where she felt like she was fed up. And that's her prerogative. But if she was really, concerned about school choice and vouchers, it wasn't the Democratic Party that the reason that bill fell. It was the Republicans. You had over a dozen Republicans who voted against school choice and vouchers. And so, while she did make the choice, it was a surprising moment. I do not want our listeners to believe that this woman was just sort of ran out of the party and all those things that she cared about, she couldn't have done as a Democrat. So thank you, Lisa, for letting me sort of rebuttal that last point.
On a more somber note, this made all of our lists. The Carters, Rosalynn Carter, dying recently, former President Jimmy Carter in hospice, and just the long, sad farewell of Georgia. No matter what your politics are, I think everybody would agree that was kind of hard to watch and see.
You do hate to see folks who are in pain and sort of in those final stages of life be uncomfortable. And, the three of us did a live show for a state bar audience back in March, and it was the week that Jimmy Carter had been put in hospice, if y'all recall. And I said then, I would love to go get the tape. I was like, don't count him out.
No, he's so resilient.
He's resilient. Really, and here we are at the end of the year. Hospice usually means you're down to a few weeks maybe, and now here he's made it, 8 months? I mean, absolutely incredible. Obviously, just the heart of a lion. And Rosalynn Carter deserves all of the accolades, all the love that we saw pouring out for her in Georgia and around the country. One thing that I just really feel passionately about that she focused on was doing more and having a better understanding in this country about approaches to mental health. And, let's not forget that when she first started talking about that issue, it was still pretty taboo. There were still many people who were like, get on with it, right? Just get over yourself. It's kind of how they, mental health wasn't real to a lot of Americans. And I think leaders like her, and there are others, have helped change that public dialogue. And I think that's hugely important and a great tribute to her life. And let me also say that we saw in her funeral the eulogy from Jason Carter, which was brilliant and hilarious.
I think of all the things she accomplished, her most viral moment was when they were at a baseball game and the Braves put them on the kiss cam.
And he looked comfortable in his skin. He looked really good up there. And it just made me wonder if, maybe some sort of political comeback is in his future. I think he's just in a better headspace than he was in 2014 when he ran for governor.
Yeah, he says he's going to carry on the legacy. We had the opportunity to talk to him a few times, and I think he's going to continue carrying that torch. Tharon, any thoughts from you about the Carters before we wrap here?
Lisa, we cannot talk enough about Rosalind Carter. I mean, the great things that she not only did for the state of Georgia, but her commitment to dealing with the AIDS crisis, places like Africa. Her continuing to uplift the small town that they lived in, and all the great things that she did. And if you just look at the first ladies, who showed up, the former first ladies to her funeral, that just showed you respect. But I know we're getting ready to wrap, but I know I mentioned a couple other big winners that we lost, some giants this past year, Marvin Arrington Sr., Dr. Christine King Ferris, and also Bill Shipp, just to name a few of the great giants, political, civil rights, people who are very committed to public service and making sure that we as Georgians try to live the best lives that we could. And so, again, just as we reflect on all the things that have happened politically in 2023, we always got to take a moment to offer our condolences and respects to the life and legacies of all those people that I just mentioned.
Thank you for mentioning Bill Shipp, Tharon. I do want to mention that I didn't know him well. We met a few times. He was already sort of beyond his career by the time I was in politics, because he was fairly old when he died. So he had a long retirement. But when I was at UGA, kind of looking at my career and what I wanted to do, I would go to the second floor of the library a lot because they had this political collection. They had Bill Shipp's newsletter there, which I couldn't afford to have a subscription because I was a poor college kid. But I'd go there every week and I would read his newsletter. And it was just, I wish we had something like that. That was beyond what we get from, the one major newspaper in the state today, with a viewpoint that was insightful. He had great sources, and he just brought Georgia politics to life in a way that I hope that this show does today. So he's an inspiration for me in my career. So I'm glad that he brought up Bill Shipp. And speaking of UGA, I do want to mention this too, because when it comes to best of 2023, I mentioned January's riots as worst of. January's 65-7 victory over TCU for the Georgia Bulldogs in SoFi Stadium was one of the best days of 23 for me. It was so much fun.
Couldn't forget that.
It was so much fun. And, and I always thought if UGA could win a national championship, which we've now done twice in a row, and we'll be back, is that I would be happier, that I would just be generally happier. And come to find out, I was right. I have just been happier these last 2 years now that we have that monkey off our back and we are reigning national champions. It will be sad to take down our national champion flag at my house once they crown a new champion later this month.
Well, good to see you smiling there. You mentioned inspiration. Before we get out of here, I want to thank you two for such a great year and your insight and what you do. There's no other show like this that has strategists who work behind the scenes and talks to insiders. If you could list one or two inspirations for your content and for your commentary, what would they be?
Thank you, Lisa. There are two that definitely impact what I bring to this show. One is called Hacks on Tap. It's a podcast with David Axelrod, who was an Obama advisor, and Robert Gibbs, who was Obama's press secretary, and then Mike Murphy, who's a longtime Republican consultant. And it is just smart, incisive, political commentary. I'm a hack too. Tharon's a hack, and they talk about politics the way we talk about politics. They very, very intently avoid policy discussions and what bills should get passed. It's always about what's on voters' minds, what's going to move the needle. Is the messaging Biden's doing right now working? Is the messaging that Trump's doing working? And why not? It's really good from really smart guys, and they're really funny too. And then lastly, I listen to a podcast that I cite here a lot, and I have failed to ever cite it by name. But when you hear me talk about what's happening in focus groups, I am citing a podcast called The Focus Group by Sarah Longwell. And it is great. It is, obviously, there's a partisan host to it, but it's real focus groups, real voters. They've done a lot in Iowa and New Hampshire, talking what they're seeing now in these focus groups are the double rejectors, people who don't want Trump or Biden. And what I learn on that show ends up on this show quite often as far as what's top of mind for voters, particularly like, why do voters still think the economy is bad when all the indicators show it's growing and things are getting better? It's been very, very helpful for me to understand where American voters are based on those podcasts.
What about you, Tharon? What's your inspiration?
Yeah, the first one, and it kind of drives my wife crazy sometimes, but, early in the morning when I wake up, I always check my phone, of course, read the local news. I try to listen to you all, Lisa, but then I go over to Up First, which is, part of NPR. I mean, this to me gives you a really good synopsis of just like what's going on in the country. And it helps me kind of stay connected with what's going on globally. The other podcast that I've been listening to a lot more is called Slow Burn. And it's a podcast by Slate Magazine, SLATE. But, I just really listened to a series about Clarence Thomas. I mean, so I encourage our people to go out and listen. A lot I thought I knew about him, I didn't know. And then, more on the social side, I said this to you all, shout out to Shannon Sharp and Ocho Cinco, Chad Johnson. They do this wonderful podcast called Nightcap. And it's very provocative. It's funny. I mean, they talk about everything, Lisa. I mean, ain't no politics being talked about. But the reason I like listening to it is that they have figured out a way to, in a very short and concise way, take the daily topics with sports, relationships, the economy, family, you name it. I mean, they talk about all these different things, and they've taken these two former NFL players and they talk about real issues that are going on in today's world and do it well. And then lastly, the other one that I am listening to a lot, and this is another one that I've actually appeared on before, but it's called Politicology. This was a sort of spinoff from the Lincoln Project. And so a lot of those guys, Ron and others, I do go on it occasionally. It's a national podcast, just really giving us, again, a rural perspective on everything that's going on politically.
Well, again, thank you for what you do. We appreciate you both for a good year, and here's to a better one in 2024. We're going to have a lot to talk about in 2024, right?
It's going to be nuts around here in 2024. And I would say in 2023, because we have not had a lot of political things happening, my mental health has been so much better. It's been very eye-opening to me that I probably just kind of need more than anything to stick to my business work and not do politics. But 24 is going to be a fun year, lots of attention. Tharon and I are going to be on a lot of national media because people will want to know what is on the minds of Georgia voters.
Yeah, well, we all get a week off, so get some good mental health rest, and then 2024 begins. Thanks, guys. Happy New Year. Happy holidays.
Happy New Year. Hope everyone had a very Merry Christmas with their families.
Happy New Year.
Hey, it's Alex Sujong Laughlin and Kelsey McKinney
from the Normal Gossip Podcast.
We're so excited to announce that we're bringing our show live to a stage near you.
Normal Gossip is coming to Atlanta on March 8th at Symphony Hall, and we can't wait to see you there.
Join us for glow sticks, a real squirrel hat, secrets, and a great gossip story we can't stop telling.
Tickets are on sale now at normalgossiplive.com.